The night was thick with tension as we gathered in the dimly lit hall of Calais Castle. King Edward III stood before us, his presence commanding and resolute, even in the flickering torchlight. His voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the murmurs of the assembled knights and soldiers. "Loyal men of England, tonight we stand on the brink of betrayal," he began, his eyes scanning the room, locking with each of ours in turn. "Geoffrey de Charny thinks he can seize Calais through treachery. He has conspired with a traitor within our walls, but we shall turn this treachery against him." A murmur of anger and determination rippled through the hall. We had been prepared for peace, or at least a truce, but treachery, that was something none of us could abide. My name is David Grey, a knight in the service of King Edward. I stood amongst my fellow warriors, heart pounding with anticipation and anger. We had been stationed in Calais for months, maintaining a watchful eye on our French adversaries across the Channel. The city was a crucial foothold in France, a prize won through blood and sacrifice. We would not let it fall to deceit. King Edward continued, "Amerigo of Pavia has betrayed his oath. He has agreed to open the gate to Charny's men tonight, but we shall be there to greet them instead. Ready yourselves, for we strike hard and fast. We shall show them the might of England, and they will rue the day they thought to take Calais from us." As the king laid out the plan, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We were to hide near the gate, silent and still, until the moment Charny's men entered. Then we would strike with all the fury and precision we could muster. The hours dragged as we prepared for the ambush. Armor was donned, swords and axes sharpened, and final prayers whispered. The air was thick with the smell of oiled steel and the quiet murmur of hushed voices. Just before midnight, we moved out, a shadowy column of men slipping through the darkened streets of Calais. The city was eerily silent, the usual night sound subdued as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. We reached the designated gate and took our positions, hidden in the shadows of the walls and nearby buildings. I crouched beside my fellow knights, my breath shallow and controlled. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. Then, faintly at first, we heard the muffled sound of footsteps and the low murmur of voices. Charny's men were approaching. The gate creaked open, a narrow crack at first, then wider as Amerigo's treacherous hand drew back the heavy iron. I could see the glint of steel and the faint outline of the French soldiers as they began to slip through the opening. "Hold," whispered Sir William, a veteran knight beside me. "Not yet." We waited, tense and coiled like a spring. The French soldiers were inside now, their numbers growing as more and more slipped through the gate. Charny himself was among them, a tall, imposing figure in the darkness. "Now!" King Edward's voice rang out, clear and strong. We surged forward, a wave of steel and fury. The French, caught completely off guard, stumbled and fell beneath our assault. I swung my sword with all my might, the blade biting into flesh and bone. The air was filled with the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the roar of our attack. Charny, realizing the trap too late, tried to rally his men, but our momentum was unstoppable. The narrow confines of the gate and the element of surprise were in our favor. The French fell back, disorganized and panicked. Through the chaos, I saw King Edward, his presence a beacon in the melee. He fought with the strength and determination of a man half his age, his sword cutting down any who dared to stand before him. His leadership was inspiring, galvanizing us to fight harder, strike truer. The battle was fierce but swift. The French, having lost their advantage and taken by surprise, were no match for our disciplined ferocity. They were driven back, many cut down where they stood, others captured as they tried to flee. When the dawn finally broke, the ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen. The gate, once a symbol of betrayal, now stood as a testament to our victory. Geoffrey de Charny was among the captured, his grand plan in ruins, his ambitions shattered. King Edward surveyed the battlefield, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson to all who would think to take what is ours through deceit," he declared. "Calais stands, and so does the honour of England." As the sun rose higher, we began the grim task of tending to the wounded and gathering the dead. The price of victory was always high, but we had defended our city, our honor, and our king. The Battle of Calais would be remembered not just for the bloodshed, but for the resolve and bravery of those who stood against treachery and emerged victorious. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of both triumph and solemnity. We had defended Calais, thwarting the French attempt to seize it through deception, but the cost was clear in the faces of the wounded and the bodies of the fallen. I moved through the remnants of the battlefield, assisting where I could, offering a word of comfort to the injured and a prayer for the dead. Among the survivors, there was a sense of grim satisfaction. We had won, but it was not without sacrifice. Each face, every wound, was a reminder of the price we paid for our victory. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the city, King Edward summoned us to the castle courtyard. His face was a mask of determination, tempered by the weight of the losses we had endured. "Brave soldiers of England," he began, his voice resonant and clear. "Today we have shown the world that treachery cannot prevail against the strength and honor of our cause. We have defended Calais, and in doing so, we have defended our nation." There was a cheer from the assembled men, though it was muted by fatigue and the somber reality of our situation. We had prevailed, but the war was far from over. Edward continued, "Geoffrey de Charny and his co-conspirators will face justice. Their betrayal will not go unpunished, and let this serve as a warning to any who would think to follow their path." Among the captives, Charny stood defiantly, though his eyes betrayed the fear and uncertainty that now gripped him. He had gambled everything on this night and lost. His reputation, his men, his very life hung in the balance. As we dispersed, I found myself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The thrill of battle had given way to a deep, abiding weariness. I sought solace in the chapel, a small, quiet space where I could gather my thoughts and give thanks for our survival. Kneeling before the altar, I offered a prayer for those we had lost, for the strength to continue, and for the wisdom to navigate the trials yet to come. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, a reminder of the delicate balance between light and darkness that we walked every day. "David," a voice interrupted my reverie. It was Sir William, his face etched with concern. "The king has requested your presence. He wishes to speak with you about the events of the night." I rose, nodding in acknowledgement. "Of course, Sir William, I will go at once." Making my way to the king's chamber, I wondered what more there was to discuss. We had succeeded, but perhaps there were further details to address, plans to make for the future. King Edward's room was modestly appointed, reflecting the pragmatism of a ruler who valued function over form. He sat at a heavy wooden table, a map of the region spread out before him, marked with the positions of our forces and those of the enemy. "David," he greeted me, looking up from his work. "Thank you for coming. There are matters we must discuss." I bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, how can I be of service?" He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. We have much to talk about. The battle is won, but we must now ensure the security of Calais and our foothold in France. Your actions last night were commendable, and I value your insight." I took the seat, feeling the weight of his words. The king's praise was a rare and precious thing, but it was clear that our challenges were far from over. "We have secured a great victory, but we must remain vigilant," Edward continued. "The French will not take this defeat lightly, and there will be more attempts to wrest Calais from our control. I need men I can trust, men who have proven themselves, to help fortify our position here." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the task ahead. "I am honored, Your Majesty. Whatever you need, I will do my utmost to provide." Edward smiled, a brief but genuine expression. "I know you will, David. That is why I am entrusting you with a crucial task. You will oversee the strengthening of our defenses, ensure that our men are well prepared and ready for any future assaults." The responsibility was immense, but I felt a surge of determination. "I will not fail you, Your Majesty. Calais will remain secure." "Good," he said, his gaze steady. "We have come too far to falter now. With men like you, I have no doubt we will hold fast." As I left the king's chamber, the weight of my new duties settled on my shoulders. The battle was over, but the war continued. Calais was a symbol of our resilience and strength, and I was determined to see it remain in English hands. The days that followed were a blur of activity. We worked tirelessly to repair the damage from the battle, to fortify our defences, and ensure that our position was unassailable. The men were weary, but their spirits were high, buoyed by the knowledge that we had faced treachery and emerged victorious. As I moved through the city, overseeing the preparations, I saw the faces of the people, soldiers and civilians alike, who looked to us for protection and leadership. Their trust was a heavy burden, but also a source of inspiration. We fought not just for ourselves, but for them, for the future of our nation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the battlements, I found a moment to rest. I stood atop the walls, looking out over the expanse of land that stretched towards the French territories. The landscape, bathed in the hues of twilight, seemed deceptively peaceful. But I knew better than to be lulled by its serenity. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said, breaking my reverie. It was Sir William, his expression one of shared understanding. "It is," I agreed, "though it hides the perils that lie ahead." Sir William nodded, leaning against the stone parapet. "We've done well, David. The men respect you, and the preparations are nearly complete. But we must remain vigilant." I turned to face him, appreciating his steady presence. "Indeed. We cannot afford any lapse in our defences. The French will be seeking vengeance." As if on cue, a messenger arrived, breathless and urgent. "Sir David, Sir William, the king requires your presence immediately." We exchanged a glance, concern etched in both our faces. Without another word, we followed the messenger to the king's chamber. King Edward was poring over reports, his face drawn with the weight of command. He looked up as we entered, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Gentlemen, it appears our respite is over," he said without preamble. "Our scouts have reported increased activity among the French forces. They are mustering for another attack." The news was expected, but it still sent a shiver down my spine. "How soon, Your Majesty?" I asked. "Within the week," Edward replied. "They are moving quickly, likely hoping to catch us off guard." "We won't be," Sir William said firmly. "We are ready." Edward's gaze softened slightly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I have no doubt, but we must ensure every man is prepared. I want constant patrols along the walls and the garrison on high alert." We nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As we left the king's chamber, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The time for vigilance was now. Every decision, every action could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. We doubled our patrols, ensuring that every corner of the city was watched. The blacksmiths worked tirelessly, producing weapons and repairing armor. Morale was high, bolstered by the presence of King Edward, who moved among the men, offering words of encouragement and resolve. One night, as I made my rounds, I came across a group of young soldiers gathered around a fire. Their faces were lit by the flames, a mixture of determination and apprehension evident in their expressions. I joined them, sensing their need for reassurance. "Sir David," one of them said, a lad no older than 17, "do you think we can hold them off again?" I looked at him, seeing the fear behind his brave facade. "I know we can," I replied firmly. "We've faced worse odds and prevailed. We are well prepared, and we fight for a just cause. Remember, you are not alone. We stand together, and together we will defend Calais." They nodded, drawing strength from my words. In moments like these, leadership was as much about inspiring hope as it was about strategy. As the night deepened, I continued my patrol, the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. We had done all we could to prepare, and now we had to trust in our efforts and our resolve. On the morning of the anticipated attack, the air was thick with tension. The sky was overcast, a fitting backdrop for the storm that was about to break. From the battlements, we could see the French forces assembling, their banners fluttering in the wind. King Edward joined us on the walls, his presence a steadying force. "Hold your positions," he commanded. "We fight not just for Calais, but for England. Let them come and see the strength of our resolve. The French began their advance, a formidable force moving with precision and purpose. As they neared the walls, our archers let loose a volley of arrows, darkening the sky with their deadly rain. The first line of French soldiers faltered, but they pressed on, determined to breach our defences. The battle that ensued was fierce and unrelenting. The clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the roar of commands filled the air. From my vantage point, I could see the determination on both sides, each fighting with everything they had. We repelled their initial assault, our defences holding firm. But the French were relentless, launching wave after wave against us. I moved through the chaos, rallying our men, directing their efforts where needed most. At one point, a section of the wall was nearly breached. I led a counterattack, my sword cutting through the enemy ranks, driving them back with sheer force and determination. The men followed my lead, their spirits lifted by our success. Hours passed, the battle raging on with no end in sight. But slowly, the tide began to turn in our favour. The French, exhausted and demoralised by their inability to breach our defences, began to falter. King Edward's voice rang out above the din, a rallying cry that spurred us on. For England, for Calais, drive them back. With renewed vigour, we pushed forward, our counter-attacks gaining momentum. The French lines broke, their soldiers retreating in disarray. Victory was within our grasp. As the sun began to set, the battlefield was strewn with the fallen, both friend and foe. But we had held. Calais remained in our hands. King Edward surveyed the scene, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "We have done well," he said, his voice carrying a note of weary triumph. "But we must remain vigilant. The fight is far from over." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The battle had been won, but the war continued. We would hold Calais, no matter the cost. That night, as the city settled into an uneasy calm, I found a moment to reflect. We had faced treachery and overwhelming odds, but our resolve had seen us through. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. As long as we stood together, we could withstand any challenge. And so, with the dawn of a new day, we prepared to face whatever lay ahead, our spirits unbroken, our determination unwavering. The Battle of Calais would be remembered not just for the bloodshed, but for the strength and courage of those who fought to defend it. In the days following the battle, Calais buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. The city had been secured for now, but we knew the French would not rest. Each man and woman in Calais understood the gravity of our situation, and it only served to strengthen our resolve. King Edward called a council of his most trusted knights and commanders, myself included. We gathered in the great hall, the air heavy with the lingering scent of sweat and battle. Maps were spread out before us, marking our positions and the potential avenues of future attacks. "Gentlemen," the king began, his tone grave, "we have won a significant victory, but we must remain vigilant. The French will regroup, and they will come again. We need to anticipate their next move and strengthen our defences accordingly." Sir William spoke up, his voice steady and confident. "We should increase our patrols along the coastline. If the French plan to attack again, they may attempt a landing south of the city. We must be ready to intercept them." I nodded in agreement. "And we should send scouts further afield to monitor French movements. We need to know their plans before they make their move." King Edward listened, his eyes scanning the room. "Agreed. We will bolster our patrols and increase our scouting efforts. Additionally, we must ensure that our supplies are secure. A prolonged siege would test our resources, and we cannot afford to be caught unprepared." With our tasks laid out before us, we dispersed to our duties. The following weeks were a blur of activity as we worked tirelessly to implement our plans. The men trained rigorously, our scouts ventured deep into enemy territory, and our defences were strengthened to withstand any assault. One afternoon, as I oversaw the training of new recruits, a scout returned with urgent news. Breathless and covered in dust, he reported directly to me. "Sir David, the French are on the move. A large force is assembling near the coast, and they are preparing for another assault. They could be here within days. I wasted no time, immediately seeking out King Edward. He was in the chapel, a place he often retreated to for moments of quiet reflection amidst the chaos of war. "Your Majesty," I said, bowing slightly. "Our scouts have reported that the French are preparing for another attack. They could be upon us within days." Edward's expression hardened, but there was no trace of fear, only determination. "Then we must be ready. Alert the garrison and double our patrols. We will meet them with the same resolve that saw us through the last battle." The news spread quickly through Calais, and the city braced itself for the coming storm. Every man knew his duty. Every woman and child played their part in ensuring our defences were as strong as they could be. The day of the attack arrived, grey and overcast. The air was thick with anticipation as we took our positions along the walls and in the streets. I stood with my men, my heart steady and my mind focused. This was what we had trained for, what we had bled for. The French army appeared on the horizon, a dark wave moving inexorably towards us. Their banners fluttered in the wind, and the sound of their marching feet reached us long before they came into view. This was a larger force than before, a determined effort to reclaim Calais. King Edward stood atop the battlements, his armour gleaming despite the dull light. He raised his sword, a symbol of our defiance, and his voice rang out strong and clear. "Men of England, today we face a formidable foe. But we have faced worse and emerged victorious. Stand firm, fight with honour, and know that we fight for our home, our families, and our future. Let them come and see the strength of our resolve." A cheer erupted from the ranks, and we readied ourselves for the onslaught. The French advanced, their siege engines in tow, and the battle began anew. The first wave hit us like a tide, crashing against our defences. Arrows flew through the air, finding their marks in flesh and shield. Our archers responded in kind, their bows singing as they loosed volley after volley into the approaching enemy. The ground shook with the impact of the siege engines, but our walls held firm. The French pushed forward, desperate to breach our defences. I fought alongside my men, my sword rising and falling in a relentless rhythm. Every strike, every parry was a testament to our determination to hold Calais. Through the chaos, I caught glimpses of King Edward, his presence a constant inspiration. He moved with a grace and power that belied his years, his sword flashing as he cut down any who dared approach. His courage and leadership were the heart of our defence. Hours passed in a blur of violence and noise. The French were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless, but we held our ground. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Our resolve and the strength of our defences began to wear down the enemy. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the battlefield, the French finally began to retreat. Their forces, battered and broken, fell back from our walls. A cheer rose from our ranks, a triumphant roar that echoed through the city. We had done it. We had held Calais once more. King Edward stood before us, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but alight with pride. "Well done, my friends. You have shown the true spirit of England this day. Calais stands because of your bravery and your unyielding resolve." The men cheered, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the glow of victory. We had faced a formidable foe and emerged triumphant, our city secure for now. As the dust settled and we tended to the wounded, I found a moment to reflect on the battles we had fought and the ones yet to come. We had proven our strength, but the war was far from over. The French would return, and we would be ready. For now, Calais stood as a beacon of our resilience and determination. We had faced treachery and overwhelming odds, and we had prevailed. The spirit of England burned bright within our walls, and we would continue to defend it with all our might. As night fell, I stood atop the battlements, looking out over the quiet battlefield. The stars began to appear, one by one, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always light. We would hold Calais, no matter the cost. For England, for our king, and for the future we fought to protect.